if there are studies done from independent organizations in all of these different countries, all of these different societies that say that gender affirming care is the best way to go about it, I'm sorry, but you, 17-year-old Hannah Faulkner, or Matt Walsh, or whoever the hell, I'm sorry, but these people aren't going to supersede a therapist, a doctor, a psychiatrist, people that know what they're talking about. And if you have boards of doctors across the country, all of these doctors who have this consensus that gender affirming care is the best way to go, I'm sorry, but I don't want like a teenage conservative to be telling my kid that no, you can't have this certain form of care. I mean, I have a fun little debate for you guys today, and this is what indoctrination looks like. So a few weeks back, I was invited on this right-wing podcast hosted by this young conservative girl, and I said, yes, sure, I'll go on. I don't think she's ever had any liberals on her show before, so I'm always down to give our point of view to audiences that have never heard it, audiences that are stuck in an echo chamber. And what she told me is, we're not going to debate anything. I just want to bring you on and ask about your experiences at the Trump rally. We could talk about Biden versus Trump. We can talk about all of these issues. But when I hopped on the call, this 40-minute interview turned into a 1.5-hour debate about trans issues, or it was more like an hour 15 minutes, where we just talked about trans issues the entire time. And a lot of you guys are going to be commenting, Adam, this is a waste of time. Why would you do this? But the reason is, I think it's important to have people interact with these fact patterns, and I think it's important to show you guys how to interact with people who think like this. I say about after 3 of these conversations, you'll be voting for Biden. So I'm going to show you guys some of my favorite moments from this debate, and beware, you hear all of the conservative tropes. You hear that gay people are immoral. You hear that trans kids are being mutilated. You hear all of this BS that is repeatedly spread, and I do my best to combat it despite me not being prepped for an hour-long trans debate. Again, I thought this was going to be an interview, but I think it was a good conversation, and I want to show you guys how it went. As always, make sure to leave a like, make sure to comment a blue heart, and subscribe, and try to make it till the end. I know it'll be hard, but it's worth it.
What is your stance on, because you briefly mentioned it, the LGBTQ movement just as a whole?
Yeah, so first of all, I want to define some things before I start throwing out these words. When I talk about the word liberalism, I don't mean Joe Biden liberal. I mean like small L liberalism, which means the ability to love who you want, follow any religion you want, to dress how you want, essentially just freedom of expression. That is what liberalism means to me on a broad scale. And I think the goal of any society should be to maximize happiness for each person in that society. I think we probably have that shared goal. Everybody in America should be as happy as they possibly can be. And I think the way that happens is basically letting people dress how they want, letting people love who they want, as long as it's not harming anyone else. So I'm a big freedom lover. I love freedom. And the ability to do all of these things freely, I think only benefits society, because once we start to oppress people based on their race, based off their religion, based on who they want to love, we start to lose the cohesiveness of a society. So like when it comes to doing what you want without harming people, of course you shouldn't be able to rob a bank or kill somebody because somebody else is harmed when that happens. But I don't see the harm in being able to love who you want, because I mean, just on a broad scale, if we look at even heterosexual marriages, I think 50 to 60% of them end in divorce anyways. So who are we to say that if 2 people love each other and they're the same sex, that they shouldn't be able to get married if it could be fruitful? If I see a gay couple walking down the street, I'm not sure how that directly affects me. And as far as
So ultimately, I think, where's the line? Like, where is the line when we're going to be like, and I actually know gay people. Like, I have a friend, I'm actually going to see her tonight. She's meeting me up with at this General Flynn event, and she's totally against gay marriage. Now, she is a lesbian, totally against gay marriage. But first off, I don't think the government should be involved with marriage at all. I don't think they should be involved with, go ahead.
No, that brings me on to my next point. I didn't mean to cut you off, but when it comes to trans children or trans people in general, I don't think the government should be able to step in and stop people from getting the treatment they would want. So if you can imagine a family, say like a mom and a dad bring their kid to the doctor, and that kid, the doctor, the mom and the dad, and maybe a therapist on the side all agree that some form of gender affirming care is the best way to go, do you think the government should be able to step in and stop that with a 16-year-old kid?
I think what we should be looking at is the fact that the government is encouraging it. The United States government is pushing the LGBT. I call it the rainbow cult because it is. It's just a movement run by sexual deviants running around saying it, the Pride movement, whatever. We can talk about that later if you want. But the United States government, Big Pharma, the medical industry, the educational system, Hollywood, I mean, the list goes on. Literally every single institution in our society is promoting this movement. And so we could talk about how the government does it. Yeah, I don't think the government should be involved. The government needs to take their hand out of a lot of stuff, right? But ultimately, let me ask you this. Do you think that if someone is murdering someone else, if someone is harming someone else, robbing someone else, should the government get involved in that?
Yeah, that
Like,
goes back to what I said.
should people say, hey, that's wrong. We shouldn't be doing that. Like, this is not okay. Like, you're harming someone else.
Of course, that goes back. Like, I think one of the first things I said in my opening statement was we should maximize happiness and freedom in the society as long as you're not harming other people. So if you're robbing a bank, if you're killing somebody, that's not okay. But again, I just don't see the harm in a parent, a doctor, and their kid having the freedom to choose what they want to do. And this, honestly, I don't see our institutions pushing gay people at all. I think they let people know that it's okay to love who you want. It's kind of analogous. You've probably heard this analogy before, but left-handedness used to be really, really low. Like nobody was left-handed because the government, or not the government, but institutions would basically punish you if you were left-handed. And then as the years went on, as we showed that, okay, you can be right or left-handed, there's charts showing this, the amount of left-handed people skyrocket. I think that's what we're seeing now. When there's more representation in culture, when there's more representation in the media, then people love who they want. And there's this term called heteronormativity, which means that like, and normatively, everybody is straight in these shows. So if you're watching a show and you see a straight couple go on screen, you're not going to second guess it. You're going to be like, oh, that is just a straight couple. But the second a gay couple goes on screen, people are like, why are they gay? Why are there two gay people? Like basically implying the fact that it's not natural or that it shouldn't be there. So
well, it isn't natural. It's not natural at all. You follow the science. I mean, let me ask you this. Do you think a man can become pregnant?
No.
Okay. So we have some common sense there. So you don't believe, okay, I actually was expecting you. I'm actually in this documentary right now and they are like, oh no, men can become pregnant. That's 100% men can become pregnant.
Do you think if somebody was born a woman and they start to dress in a way that really looks like a man, so you probably know who Buck Angel is, the trans man who is very buff and has like a beard, that person still has a uterus and become pregnant. So I would say that trans men, if you have a uterus, scientifically, yeah, you can become pregnant. But I don't think men
well,
can
you
become
can't
pregnant.
you can't trans your gender.
Do you think gender and sex are the same thing?
So that is something that I've heard a lot. You know, if you listen to John Money, like if you go back, if you look at history, I've done my research. First off, yes, gender and sex are the same thing. These things that we're talking about, they're not even controversial. I mean, these are just common sense. Like, this is just a common sense idea that a man cannot become a woman.
What you said is very controversial. Sex and gender are absolutely not the same thing. You can look it up right now. Sex is what is defined at birth. It's tied to your biology. It's tied to your reproductive system. Gender is socially defined and it's ever changing. So, for example, back in the 40s, you would never see a man with long hair or a man wearing jewelry. But nowadays, you can see men with long hair. You can see men with jewelry, and that doesn't mean they change their gender. That just means these roles are ever changing in our society, right? Like these outward appearing things, like what you wear, the length of your hair, they always change. That used to only women had long hair, only women wore jewelry. Nowadays, you can see women with short hair. So gender is basically how you outwardly appear. Sex is tied to your biology. So these two things are different, and I'm pretty sure 99%.
Yeah, and that's something, and the idea, and I don't mean to cut you off, but the idea of gender and sex being two different things, that wasn't even brought up until the 1900s with John Money. And he said that, and I'll put the quote on the screen so people can read it, of him literally saying that the reason why he wanted to separate the term gender from sex is because he wanted to confuse society. He wanted to confuse humanity.
That having two different definitions for two different words actually makes things less confusing. So if you have a strict definition for sex, a strict definition for gender, that is why these two separate things exist. That makes things less confusing. And even if I grant you that it only started to be this way in the 1900s, I mean, science is ever changing. That's the beautiful thing about it. Definition, science, these things can change over time. I'm sure there are other examples of that. But yeah, I mean, having two different definitions for two different concepts makes things less confusing. It makes things easier for scientists. And yeah, I mean, I just think I totally disagree with the idea that gender and sex are the same thing. I think that goes against all contemporary science. But I think we should go back to, I think the reason why it gets confusing is because about 99% of the time, your gender will line up with your sex. So people in society often appear the same way that their sex is. And I think after this, we should look up some definitions of sex versus gender. We can find in almost any single medical book that these are two different things. But like you said, there are men with feminine qualities and females with masculine qualities. So I think that as time goes on, these lines of what gender are only get more and more blurred. These gender roles change. And it's basically how you're socialized. So like if you ever take like an engineering class in college or something, you'll find that 95% of the people in that class are going to be men. And that's not because men are born to be wired to like video games or like engineering. It's because of the way people are socialized from a young age to like these things. So a lot of this socialization plays in, and I think that plays in the gender roles a lot. And we can get into that more, but I just want to say one more thing. I think on the other side of like, you guys think institutions are pushing LGBTQ, but I think there's a lot of trans hysteria on the other side, on your guys' side. So sometimes when I ask Trump supporters at the rallies, like, what percent of America do you think is trans? They'll say like 30%. They have no clue what the actual number is. You have people like Matt Walsh, who's one of the leading people in the anti-trans movement. He made a whole documentary about it. Then after the documentary was made, he went on Joe Rogan's podcast and said millions of kids are on puberty blockers. There are millions of kids on puberty blockers. The real number was like 700. Like 700 kids were on puberty blockers. And the thing is, I guess I do have a question for you. So I kind of touched on this earlier, but if a kid goes to therapy for 4 years from the ages of 12 to 16, then when they're 16 years old, their mom and dad bring them into the doctor. There's a board of psychiatrists, and they say that you have gender dysphoria, and gender affirming care will make your quality of life better. Should the government be able to step in and stop that gender affirming care from happening? Because that's what's happening in a lot of these red states. They're trying to ban.
So I'll respond to that. Actually,
Yeah.
first off, I think I actually am for gender affirming care. If you're born a man, you'll always be a man. When they come in the doctor, see, gender affirming care, and what the media is pushing and what the medical industry is telling us is not gender affirming care. Gender affirming care is when you come into the doctor, you're born with male genitalia, you're always going to be a man. If you're born with female genitalia, you're always going to be a female. That's gender affirming care. And I think it's total hypocrisy. And that's honestly, it's laughable that, all these little terms and the terminology being used. It's like, wait a second, that's hypocrisy because this is gender affirming care. Yeah, you're born a man, you always be a man.
There are two
Trans women,
aspects of
sorry?
There are two aspects of gender affirming care. There might be a few more, but there's social gender affirming care and medical gender affirming care. So what most people think is that you're going in and you're having sex changes right away, but that never, like, nobody under the age of 14 has gotten a sex change. Number one, most of the time when people under 18 get gender affirming care, it's in the form of being able to dress how you want or getting puberty blockers. So let me reframe the question. Do you think a 16-year-old, if prescribed by a doctor, they say gender affirming care in the form of social gender affirming care, being able to dress how you want, we have a board of doctors saying this will improve the 16-year-old's quality of life. Do you think the government should be able to stop that 16-year-old from dressing how they want?
Well, when science shows that transgender people, by and large, are more suicidal, more depressed, more anxiety-ridden than any person, than the general population, when I see these studies showing that after these people go through these surgeries, which is a study, I'll actually put them on the screen so people can have them, and I'm not just spewing this out of my mouth. I think having proof is important. So I'll have the studies on the screen, but when we have studies showing that after these people go through these surgeries and they're 19 times more likely to commit suicide after these surgeries and hormones, I don't think this is life, gender affirming care. I don't think this is care. If I go to my doctor, who I've been seeing for years, I've been struggling with depression, I've been struggling with anxiety, and I tell my doctor, let's just say his name is Dr. Bob. Dr. Bob, you know what? I have figured out why I'm so depressed, why I'm so anxiety-ridden for the past 15, 20 years, and I know exactly the cure to my depression and my anxiety. He's gonna say, what is it? Like, what is this cure that you've got? Doctor, I just need you to cut off my arm right at my elbow. Just cut it off right here, and I'll be happy. All my anxiety will be gone. The doctor's gonna be like, Hannah, when I became a doctor, I gave an oath to my license that I would first do no harm.
Here's the difference. I don't think there is a single doctor in the world who, if I went in there and I said, you should cut off my arm, is there any doctor that would be okay with that, do you think?
Exactly. So
No, no,
why
no,
are there
that's the thing.
doctors?
So
Exactly. So
then
why are there doctors telling us that we should cut off our genitalia in our healthy breast?
because the difference is there's absolutely zero supporting evidence for cutting off your arm and that improving your quality of life. But there are tons of studies saying that gender affirming care, either socially or surgically, does help you. And I know you're going to put some study up on the screen, but I'm pretty sure like the main study that people refer to is this one from Sweden. But if you actually read at the end of the study, it concludes that gender affirming care does improve the quality of life. And I think there's a little bit of causation correlation when you say that people who are transgender tend to be more suicidal or more anxiety ridden. I think if you're going through something like this and society isn't accepting you for who you are, of course you're going to end up being more depressed or more anxiety ridden. And when you're sitting there for tens of years, or like however many years, say from ages like 12 to 25, and your brain doesn't align with your body, that's what gender dysphoria is. You feel like you're something else, then of course you're going to be more prone to depression or anxiety. But I want to go back to my question one more time because you keep kind of skirting around this answer. I want to ask you, so if I take my kid to the doctor, my hypothetical kid, and the doctor, the board of psychiatrists all say that this person dressing in a different way will improve their quality of life, do you think that the doctor and that board of people should be able to do that without the government stepping in?
Sorry, say that one more time. I think it cut off on your end. You said that you were talking about the government, like the same question. I think you
Hypothetically,
asked it.
yeah, hypothetically, I bring my kid to the doctor, and the doctor, a therapist, all of these people, after years of analyzing and does this person have gender dysphoria, they say the first step we should take is let you dress how you want. Dress differently. If it's a guy, hey, this guy can wear jewelry, grow out their hair. Do you think the government should be able to step in and stop that? Or do you think that's an okay form of gender affirming care?
I think when you have medical professionals lying to people, because that is a lie. When any medical professional, it's like if I go into the doctor and they tell me I have to take a vaccine, or I'm going to be kicked out, or I'm going to have something removed from me, I have to take this vaccine. I have no choice. Yes, the government has the duty to say no. That's actually illegal. That's against the law. Like this is you're stripping them of
Interesting.
their freedom of speech, of their religious right.
Well, I'm not used to arguing against conservatives who want the government to step in more and stop certain medical things, but it's interesting, like it's okay if you, Hannah Faulkner, think that doctors and therapists shouldn't be giving certain forms of gender affirming care, but at the end of the day, I trust these doctors, and I'm not sure like who you are to say that these doctors are lying to you. I mean, if you have boards of doctors across the country, all of these doctors who have this consensus that gender affirming care is the best way to go, I'm sorry, but I don't want like a teenage conservative to be telling my kid that no, you can't have this certain form of care. I mean, you can start cutting off other stuff too. Like if my kid has ADHD and I take them in and they're diagnosed with ADHD, and somebody else, some random person says, "Hey, I don't agree with Adderall. You shouldn't be able to give your kid Adderall." Should the government be able to step in and stop that? And I also want to dispel this notion that kids are going in and getting their genitalia cut off. That is not happening en masse. Most forms, I mean, like I'm going to go back to the Matt Walsh example. He says that millions of kids are on puberty blockers. The number was like 700 across the country. And out of those
Even
700
if it's
kids,
700, and even if it's 700, that's 700 kids that are near my age that are being lied to and sent down a path of destruction. That's 700
are
kids.
they being
And
lied
because I
to?
have
Because,
compassion and love in my heart, I don't want to see that kid go down a path of destruction. What I've seen my
okay, but
friends go down, go ahead.
if there is a board of therapists, so if you want to get gender, if you want to get puberty blockers, you need to be taking therapy for multiple years. You need to be seeing the same doctor for multiple years. So I'm going to ask again, like, who are you to say that these doctors and therapists are wrong? Why would I ever want someone like you telling my kid what they can do when we have this body of science? We have all of this stuff, and you can probably cherry pick one or two articles, but again, a lot of these are one or two studies, but then we can go and look at the conclusion of this Sweden study. I mean, we can pull it up, we can scroll to the bottom, and it says that gender affirming care improves your quality of life.
Again, I always go back to that point. If every single person in society came up to me and said, you know what? You're wrong because these studies, these scientific studies show that people can become dogs. People can do whatever the crazy study may show. I'd say I accept reality. I acknowledge the reality of these things, and I know I have common sense. So that's why I always say I believe the reason we're here, that we're talking about these issues, the reason we have to even say that and try to get pornographic content. And yeah, it's in the schools. I've had to read, again, going back to the point, I read a book. It was called This Book is Gay. This Book is Gay was in a library nearby. It was in the elementary school. And I don't think, period, sex is spiritual. Our government, our educational system should not be talking to our children about sexual acts. Now, they should be telling our kids about anatomy, the basic anatomy, fallopian tubes, uterus, all of those things. That's just basic anatomy. Of course, you should be talking about that. I don't think there should be any, there should not be any CRT, any of these ideologies in the classroom. History, math, language arts, and what's another one? Science. That's it. Anatomy. That's it. That's all you need. Just the basic schooling. And I'll say this too. And I'll let you actually go ahead before I say anything else.
So a few things that you said. So earlier you said you'll put a study on screen that shows that gender affirming care doesn't work. To me, that sounds like you're going to cherry pick one study out of a whole body of science. But number two, you keep making this vague appeal to common sense. And I just don't believe this idea that your common sense supersedes this whole body of science. You keep coming up with these hypothetical articles. Like, what if there was an article saying that you could turn into a cat? What if there was an article saying Jupiter didn't exist? The thing is, none of these studies exist, and they don't exist for a reason, because if this had been studied, they would come to the conclusion that it doesn't work. But the reason there are studies showing that gender affirming care works is because currently our science believes that gender affirming care is the best way to go. So I don't like all these hypothetical articles or studies that you keep bringing up that just don't exist. They don't exist for a reason. The same reason that there's not a study that exists saying that you cut off your arm. And again, if there are studies done from independent organizations in all of these different countries, all of these different societies that say that gender affirming care is the best way to go about it, I'm sorry, but you, 17-year-old Hannah Faulkner, or Matt Walsh, or whoever the hell, I'm sorry, but these people aren't going to supersede a therapist, a doctor, a psychiatrist, people that know what they're talking about. And I don't like this appeal to common sense you keep making, because you can say common sense over and over, but is it common sense? Is it common sense to just like basically get rid of all the modern science that we have and just go back to what we knew 40 years ago?
I mean, does it make sense to just cut off someone's natural, healthy breast and genitals just because they feel like they're the opposite gender? Does that make sense? Because to me, it doesn't. To me, it doesn't make sense that we have teachers and doctors and people in our society encouraging children to go down this path of destruction, which is a lie. I mean, it goes. Yeah, you can deny it all day long. That's it takes that I'm bringing in common sense. Yeah, because it is. It's just common sense. I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure this stuff out. 50 years ago, if I was talking to my grandma or my great-grandpa or my, actually it was my great-grandfather that fought in World War II. Yeah, like if I would have mentioned this to him, he'd say, "You're absolutely insane. This is never going to happen. These kids are not going to be cutting off their, what in the world are you talking about? Like, this is disgusting."
Well, this was probably also a time
why would you bring something so stupid up?
Well, yeah, if I told people 60 years ago that black and white people would be drinking from the same water fountain, they'd be like, "What? What are you talking about?" That's the cool thing about society and science, is that we progress as a culture. If I told people 200 years ago that black people wouldn't be enslaved anymore, they'd be like, "Are you kidding me? My slaves will be gone?" I'd be like, "Yeah, like this is how things happen. Science progresses, essentially."